Melissa Simpson.
I'm Jeremy Davis.
I'm Hiba Sayed.
And I'm Amina Tia, and this is KN 243 News.
Good morning, I'm Melissa Simpson, and you're watching the KN243 special on body fat percentage as a predictor of CVD in children. We turn our attention to a growing concern throughout the world, obesity, and its effects it may have on the individual. One of the most concerning populations affected in recent years is that of children. When we think about obesity, we may automatically think about adults. But what about those that are too young to realize the detrimental effects a certain lifestyle can have on them? Childhood obesity has risen dramatically in recent years due to increases in sedentary lifestyles and high-caloric diets. According to a recent study conducted by Halisi et al., 10% of children worldwide are considered to be obese. The truly shocking statistic reported was the rates of the obesity of children in the U.S., 28.8%. Now, what does this actually mean for the future of our country? A study previously reported reveals the appalling truth. An increase in body fat percentage has been linked with lower social support, negative peer engagement. These both lead to negative impacts on psychological well-being, such as low self-esteem. And finally, negative impacts on physical well-being. This includes the numerous cardiovascular diseases. Here to talk to us more about what exactly body fat percentage is and CVD is Hiba Sayed.
CVD, or cardiovascular disease, is the leading cause of death in the United States of America. This is pertaining to the heart and blood vessels. Some examples of CVD are hypertension, stroke, dyslipidemia, coronary artery disease, and congestive heart failure. Earlier, I spoke to someone with a cardiovascular disease in order to gain some insight on some of the symptoms you might experience. Describe to me some of the symptoms that you got from cardiovascular disease.
Yes, of course. I had chest pain known as angina. I was lightheaded and dizzy. My heartbeat was fast, and I would be short of breath most of the time. And sometimes I would also turn pale.
So how does one get cardiovascular disease? Well, we know that it has positive and negative risk factors. One of the positive risk factors is obesity. Yes, folks, you heard that right. If you're obese, then your risk of developing a cardiovascular disease will increase. So, how do we check for obesity? This can be done by looking at an individual's body composition, which is made up of their essential fat mass, lean body mass, and adipose fat mass. In order to gain an accurate estimation of body composition, which we can then use to derive our body fat percentage, different assessments need to be utilized and looked at through a multi-component model. This model looks at different components of your body at one level. According to Lohman, it is especially important to use this model when looking at children because their bodies are constantly changing. Assessments that are used to find body composition are skin folds, bioelectrical impedance analysis, dual energy X-ray absorptiometry, and body mass index. Some of these assessments are more accurate than others, but again, through the use of this multi-component model, you are able to cross-check and gain more detailed overview of the individual's composition. And now, I'll turn it over to Alexis, who will share some of her studies.
Thank you, Hiba. Hello, I'm Alexis Perez, and I will be speaking to you about a study that shows body fat percentage and gender relating to CVD risk factors. This study comes from an article named Percent Body Fat and Chronic Disease Risk Factors in U.S. Children and Youth. According to the table number 2, the number of boys and girls were put into gender-specific categories for body fat. They found that 19% of the boys had body fat greater than or equal to 25%. Those levels indicate a relation to elevated CVD risk factors. They also found that girls had body fat greater than or equal to 30%. Those levels also indicate an increase in CVD risk factors. These are the boys where it shows the risk factors. These are the girls where it shows their risk factors. Girls' risk factors are higher than the boys. This shows that the boys are a tad more at risk for CVD risk factors than the girls. Figures 1 and 2 show the rising of the harmful CVD risk factors at higher levels of body fat percentage. For example, the sudden rising extensiveness of higher CRP and insulin levels are to be above 20% fat in boys and above 30% in girls. All of these children reach the risk percentage eventually, but the boys reached it a lot quicker than the girls did. Now I will turn it over to Jeremy, who will share information regarding childhood obesity and cardiovascular risk.
We can determine if a person is overweight by figuring out body fat percentage. Estimating the lifetime risk for obese children is very difficult because most of the studies come from observational studies. A Harvard growth study showed that being overweight in adolescence can result in higher risk for coronary heart disease in the future. Another study has shown that all causes of cardiovascular deaths were increased when childhood BMI was higher than the 75th percentile. A substantial number of children who are currently overweight or obese will also grow up to be obese adults. Childhood obesity is very serious and it appears to lead to an increased lifetime risk for cardiovascular diseases. A number of studies have demonstrated that the risk factors for cardiovascular diseases cluster together in children and adolescents and are significantly intercorrelated, such as high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes, asthma, and heart failure. These factors can be reduced if a person is willing to change their lifestyle habits.
Thank you, Jeremy, for that data. I'm Amina Tia here to talk to you about how cardiorespiratory fitness influences CVD. Now, what is cardiorespiratory fitness, you ask? Well, according to Duk-Chul Lee et al., CRF can be defined as the ability of the circulatory, respiratory, and muscular systems to supply oxygen during sustained physical activity. We know that a high body fat percentage can lead to obesity, which is a risk factor for CVD. But how does this all relate to CRF? In the new study conducted by Bay Perez et al. Called the Up and Down Study, their goal was to see if CRF has any influence on body fat percentage as a risk factor for CVD in children. They conducted an experiment including 237 kids, 111 girls, and 126 boys. They collected height and weight, which were used to calculate BMI. A CVD risk factor index was computed from waist circumference, systolic blood pressure, triglycerides, high-density lipoprotein cholesterol, and glucose. CRF was assessed by using the 20-meter shuttle run. The results from the experiment showed the percentage of the total effect of CRF on CVD risk factors mediated by BMI in boys came out to 79.5%, and in the girls, 81.2%. So how does this all relate? Their conclusion is that having a low CRF, in fact, affects the BMI. When they saw a low CRF in a child, their BMI was higher than normal. Now, having a high BMI can lead to obesity, which is a risk factor for CVD. And now, I will hand it back over to Alyssa.
Childhood obesity is one of the most overlooked epidemics of our time. It is our responsibility to tackle this issue for various reasons. One of those being its connection to the leading killer in the U.S., cardiovascular disease, both in their childhood and adult lives. Keeping an eye on how much physical activity your child is getting, as well as their diet, is the first step in the fight against obesity and creating a better future for them.